Let's just talk about it. Fine. Give me a second. We got paid. We got notes. We got. I'm not even about to. I'm not about to go through all of every last clip. Or so. I might put something in here. I'm not about to go through every last thing. You know what we really should do? Let's just have a joint episode that you both can upload, okay? And let's just get to it. Everybody get in the same room, and if you really just want to do it, then let's just have it out, okay? Because now this is your business, my business, her business, his business, our business now, okay? I'm your host, E. Rains. Let's just talk about it. Okay. Initially, I was concerned because I kept seeing all these clips popping up, right, with the pivot, discussing the whole previous situation with I Am Athlete, Brandon Marshall, and all this kind of stuff. And as time went on, it sounded like it was just more and more stank put on the interview about, you know, character assassination and stuff of Brandon. And it was just like, why is it getting nastier the more time, you know, it allows for dissipation? Like, why is it not the inverse? At this point, I don't have an issue with the pivot talking about it. I don't have an issue with I Am Athlete talking about it. If y'all want to sling mud at this point, I mean, it's a lot of ground to cover. So get to slinging, I guess. You know, honestly, if that's what we're going to do. But let's just get to it, okay? We got a whole lot of stuff going on here. So, number one, why can't we just move on? Okay, I just move on. Like, why? You know what? Never mind that. I'm not even going to ask that question anymore, because when both of you all are, both platforms are participating in it, you just do what you want to do. You know, at this point, nobody's really getting bullied or anything anymore. Like, we lost sight of all what's right. So then just have it out. And then just let us just see all this nonsense. That's okay. I mean, we can do that. That's fine. We can do that rather well. We just consume and see what we can learn from it. But the second point I got that I done wrote down, let me take a look at my notes. Okay, my notes say, this was poorly executed to me. What is going on? Okay, poorly executed. Why do I say that? I got a few things on here. The conversation felt all over the place, okay? There's no real structure. It didn't seem like we set the scene well for exactly when we want to talk about details about what happened, when it happened exactly, who was all present, and what was the key takeaways from these different things. You know, the key details of what the paper said or whatever like that. I mean, you get bits and pieces here, but it's all over the place. And I feel like, I don't know, I have to look at it again, but if you just listening to it, the editing sound all over the place. It's cut up, sliced up, because it's just like, okay, we just having a free-for-all. Well, did we not know we were going to have this conversation? Were we not aware? It's all over the place. It doesn't do Joe Budden's story any justice. I'm not sure that's what it was particularly for. It would be nice if you're gonna bring Joe in for what he can lend to the conversation, to give enough room and space to explore some of, you know, what he learned. Maybe it was, and it just kind of got cut out because of timing. I don't know, but it didn't do Joe's what Joe brings to the table. It didn't really do much justice. It was more like Joe was kind of there as a support in terms of a like-minded thought with Brandon to a certain extent, and maybe to a certain extent with everybody there. It didn't really. I feel like Joe Budden's presence could have been utilized a lot more for him to have been there, in terms of what he could have really teased out from some of the details here. And we really, it was a mess. Okay, it was a mess. Whatever. It just was, you know. So the other part of it is, find and deputize the Oprah for the day. If B cannot do it, who's up for it? Meaning, if Brandon clearly, like I think it At 19 minutes and 30 seconds, he says, "No, ask me direct. There was no lack of communication." He wanted to elaborate on elaborate on a point. Who made that point? What DJ Williams made a point of. I heard both sides, and it was a communication issue, this and that, and he wanted to elaborate on his point that there was no communication issue. Now, whether if that be true or not, that was kind of what he wanted to dive into. And did no one have the conversation as to who was supposed to be the Oprah? Usually that's Brandon a lot of times, right? And I'll talk about who it should have been in a minute, but it felt like, was there no pre-production to this episode or conversation or anything like that? Sometimes stuff just kind of comes together, but not for this conversation. Not for this conversation. This needed to be a little more thought out. Anyway, that's another reason I just all over the place. Then there was like tiptoeing around the main subject matter, and you hear Omar Kelly screaming off the mic about how you guys have been talking for 15 minutes. This is at like around 18 minutes in. You guys have been talking for like 15 minutes and nobody's saying the name. Say the name. Say the pivot. Say this person, that person. Okay. If you're going to have the conversation, then have it. If not, let's move on. It seemed like there was some frustration from Omar's perspective, and I can probably understand. I can guess. I can only speculate. We don't know this, but I can only speculate that they're, in trying to produce content. For one, you may or may not want it to. I don't know whether or not he wanted this for this episode to be aired, but it's like, if you're going to do it, let's do it. Let's talk about it. Let's produce this thing. And he was probably getting frustrated trying to produce the show, trying to produce that particular episode. With like a whole bunch of fluff conversation beforehand, and then, having to kind of cut in and be like, "Hey guys, we've been talking for like 15 minutes and nobody really even knows what you're talking about." Like, set up frame the show, frame what we're talking about to a certain extent. Oh, whatever, fine. Right? So that's just... produce the show. If we're going to talk about it, let's produce it in such a way that reaches and stands up to the expectation of quality that we know the show for. That's just one of my thoughts. And then it was way too much gas on the fire from very loosely related parties in the situation. Very loosely related folks. DJ Williams, Pac-Man Jones, Shady, like... I'm not gonna say they're not related. First of all, they're on the current show, and a lot of people have relationships off camera. Some people may have been, I think DJ talked about how, he was getting information from both sides, and that he also does some business elsewhere with Fred Taylor. So, he has maybe some insight in that sort of thing. But these people are very much loosely, if at all, related to the original issue. And it's just, we throwing gas on top of the situation. I'm like, why? But okay. Then we got the part where we're saying the quiet part out loud, which I'm going to say I don't think it should even really be necessarily a part of this, but sometimes if it is a part of it, why are we talking about this to the public? About that you're in direct competition with the pivot, and that likening it to a football game where it's zero sum, winner take all, and nothing, and to the loser be damned. As if you all cannot coexist in the same market and both do extremely well. Why? What's the point and purpose of that being the external viewpoint to the consumer? Maybe I have to concede that is the sports mentality thought process that goes into persevering, pushing through something, and and taking a situation and making it better, and getting a win out of something that otherwise looks kind of concerning. I mean, maybe, but business wise, why is your why is, instead of focusing on the end user, your end customer, is now focused going to trying to outdo the next business? Focus on your customer. Focus on the person in front of you. Of course, you're going to have market research to see how you can do better, how you can be the best in your market and that sort of thing. But to see it as so black and white, as if like it has to be one winner between the two platforms, when it would be my hope that neither one go anywhere for a long time, because I think both help people in a lot of different ways. Why must we think about it this way? And why must that be the viewpoint? It seems like there's some pushback from Brandon on accepting that viewpoint fully, at least publicly. But that's a problem for me. That's a problem. What are we doing? Brandon. Let's get it together. Let's, like, this is not it. This ain't it. And I mean, that's just the facts of it. This ain't it. I don't see the benefit that I don't see the benefit in the way this was produced. I don't see the benefit in the way that it was all over the place, and the way that there wasn't a lot of concrete setting of the scene for things that was going on to really explain and drive home the vantage point that you were sitting in when making certain decisions. And then you got the Amen choir, and nothing against the guys, because they're trying to support their boy. It's also trying to support somebody who's also there in business with. That's fine. But it's like previously when I was just talking about, RC having a comment or two, and I'm like, dude, like, back off a little bit, like, you don't really need to insert or whatever. And then look at this. I mean, they all in there. Yeah, because it's, the game is Sunday, and, and we gonna, it's gonna be us or them. What? Just focus on like I said about the pivot. Focus on what you got going on. And now it's like, okay, are y'all using it for clicks and views too? I mean, it's your story, hell. At this point, there's no real benefit for not discussing it, because it's getting nasty and people are sharing more and more things. So you might as well just really, really sit down and have a thoughtful, produced version of this. I mean, I would have thought if you were going to do this, you would have really laid this out better. This is all over the place garbage. It's just garbage. All right, whatever. Look. So, that's the negative part about it. And then, let me briefly say something positive before I get to how I think it ought to have gone. Positive is this. If we're going to discuss it, we definitely got a little bit more when it comes to facts of at least what, some of what Brandon was thinking. It was kind of fragmented to me, but we got a little bit more information as to some things that were the case, or from as he claims, allegedly, earlier on, right, as to how the deal was structured between Channing and Fred and Brandon, like how the deal was originally structured and who opted for what and all of that. We got some more information there that I think was really important. We'll get to that a little bit later. I would have preferred that DJ, Pac-Man, Shady, I would have preferred none of them have been a part of this episode. Because it was just like, but this is supposed to be the positive part. Okay, but being that they were there, it was good to see people speak up and be present for Brandon in terms of how they view him and humanizing him in a bit in a way, and being there for him, as you know, as comrades, fellow business partners, and people that can speak to the positive aspects of his character and how and his thought process, right? So I think that was a good part, if anything, of them being involved. Wholly unnecessary to me, and um kind of more negative than positive, because I don't understand it. I don't understand their involvement, but good to see them support him, and provide that support. But anyway, okay, that's the positive thing. Now, how I would have changed the way this was going to be done, if you were going to do it. Let me see. I got a couple options. Option A: have a one-on-one with Omar Kelly and Brandon. I like the format that they had before. I believe the episode was December 13th or something of 2021, where it was kind of like, what's next for I Am Athlete, and kind of, vaguely touching some things, but kind of addressing some of the open items, at the time. And it felt controlled. It felt authentic in a lot of ways. It felt like there was certain things being teased out that needed to be teased out. Not much, but just enough, right? It felt produced, and it felt properly packaged. It just felt more thoughtful, right? And then you got this situation, Omar screaming off the mic, talk about what we're talking about. Ask the question. Somebody be Oprah over there. If I can't do it, somebody, and I think Omar did a good job previously. And I think it should have been like a one-on-one with Omar, which I think would have been pretty good, to just kind of get some of this out the way, not really involve the other guys, because really ain't got much to do with it, from my understanding, from what I can tell. And just kind of get a viewpoint out there, not a viewpoint, get some objective. Well, I guess because it's from you, it would have to be your viewpoint. So to kind of get your viewpoint out there with some facts, to kind of help kill some of the what you might believe to be falsehoods about your character. That's okay. I mean, it's okay to kind of defend your character and say, "Hey guys, I know this is what's being presented. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to lay a few things out. That's not the case, and then I'm gonna move on. Raise and dismiss whatever, and then you get past it. That would have been really cool, because they did it well before. You could have did it with the Sports Illustrated young lady who you did that short clip with, and just kind of did this a different way. But whatever. Then option B: just have Brandon, Omar, and Joe. That probably would be one of the better options. If you wanted to add an external element to it, because like I said, Joe has that background with what happened with him and the Joe Budden podcast. And when Joe wants to be, he can really be instrumental in providing some perspective and context to things. Joe is best at getting in his own way, but runner up to that is connecting with visions, being a visionary, and driving something that is conceptual to materialization or outward manifestation, right? Great with stuff like that. So you can definitely run business ideas off of Joe, and in terms of the thought process for not only how you would handle things, but how you may do things differently, lessons learned, mistakes, and all of that. It would be really good to have had Omar Kelly be able to shoot off the important, key, pivotal questions, but allow there to be a dialogue between Brandon and Joe, and then Omar insert maybe here and there, to really flush out some stuff, and then have it be a teachable, something that you could pull away from as black men trying to work together and do business together and work through issues that might come up while you are yet growing and learning how to operate with each other on a different level, right? I think that would have been cool. Option C, it could have been Brandon, Joe, and maybe one or two other people or entities that he has reached out to for some sort of guidance and counsel while going through the situation with the pivot or going through that with Channing and Fred, right? So he's mentioned the gentleman from All the Smoke podcast. Joe was there. He mentioned Nori. A few different people, right? If he had just had, I mean, Nori probably ain't got the time. But if he had had, Matt Barnes or somebody on there and just have a conversation, and just be like, hey guys, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And maybe share some of that wisdom that he received off air from his support system on camera, right? Which I think would have been really cool. And that's kind of what they, one of the things they want to do, right? Is share the locker room talk a little bit, the thought process of how athletes work through some things and humanization of athletes and working through real life aspects and not just being on the field, on the court, on the whatever in terms of actually sports, right? So that would have been real cool too, right? Maybe a little messy, but cool. All three of y'all, all three of them options were better than what we got. Much better. And I'm gonna let you know that. I'm gonna let you know that it could have been better than that. That it wasn't a good look. It just was not a good look. It wasn't polished. It wasn't, and maybe polished is the wrong word because some things don't need to be polished, but it just did not look intentional. There was nothing to me that said this is intentional in terms of what I want to convey, how I want to, the consumer to absorb this, what I want to result moving forward, how to dismount. Y'all need to figure out how to dismount. And just, and it may be difficult because I'm sure that a lot of the chatter from, people, the Twitter fingers and the comments and stuff like that. I mean, oh Lord, the comments. If you ever want to get a good laugh, sometimes read some of the stuff that people write. But if I'm filming this, I'm producing this, I'm not showing that. That's getting cut. That's cut. Me hollering off mic about how you need to be, producing the show off mic. That's cut. I mean, sometimes there's a certain style of producing something sometimes where it's kind of like it's breaking the fourth wall can kind of be intriguing and feel raw in a different way. I didn't like it. I didn't like it here. we don't need that much. It's been too much time. We don't need it that raw. We don't need it that I think just do better. I don't got time for this. Do better. Okay. There were so many different better ways to do this had it just been thought about for 5 minutes. And apparently Joe Budden came out. It flew out specifically for that and only that to attend that. And looking at the editing, it looked like it's just, after the club I came over here and I'm here now and let's just talk or whatever. That did not look produced to me, but what do I know? Now to some of what kind of did come out of this cacophony of foolishness. Was a little bit more information that I don't think we had before about kind of what was offered and when it was offered and how much it was roughly about and who chose what options and all that kind of stuff. We got a little bit of information here and there. It was all over the place and fragmented, but I did the best I could to try to follow what the world was going on. But listen here. So I think around 19 minutes and 30 seconds, it was that it said, I think Brendan said, if we all put in 35,000, We bust it down 4 ways. At the time, I wanted to sell the show. There was a break in between that quote somewhere, but at the time he wanted to sell the show, and he decided that they could all split the show 4 ways, right? And it would have been about 35,000. Now let me see. Okay, now let me see what they said. Okay, so that's what Brandon said. Now let me see. Let me take a look at the notes because it's all kind of stuff going on. So there was a meeting. There was this meeting. Now Channing says there were several meetings, but apparently there was like this one particular meeting that Brandon is talking about. This was about 23 minutes and 29 seconds in. Brandon had a one-sheeter. He still had the one-sheeter. He says that he was presenting to them about how he went to his agent with WME and was trying to understand how much it would cost to produce this show and what he would need to produce it and all of that. And he came up with talking. He said he had these conversations and he got some figures back and he encouraged them to go do their own research as well. That he had done his research and they should go do some research as well. Now, one thing that has been consistent since the beginning of me trying to follow fragments of this story is that I haven't heard much about Fred or Channing doing all like this background research on different things about how to sell a show or what to do, all that. I mean, they could have, but it's never really been brought up. So, in order to produce one season of the show, now I'm not sure how many episodes one season would be, but anyway, in order to produce one season of the show, it was going to be about $35,000 per person, right? So that probably would have been 4 ways, right? It was 4 of them at first, right? So if it would have been 35,000 times 4, that'd be about 140,000. And he said, in addition to that, if they wanted to do a website and all of that and build out a website and all that, it would be about maybe 10,000. And he didn't really say how much it would be for merch, and to have merch along with the branding, right? He didn't really say, but let's just say you didn't want to have website or be worried about what's on the website, or you didn't want to worry about merch or anything like that, just to get into the ground level of ownership into the podcast that Brandon stated, allegedly that he gave everybody an opportunity for equal ownership, it would have been $35,000. Put this up on the thing. I don't know this. I would have to go verify this, but just based upon a cursory review, I done pulled this up. It said Fred Taylor made somewhere in the grand total, it just in football, somewhere around about $40 million. Okay, let's just say half of that is gone over the years from taxes and all that kind of stuff. Let's just say half of it taxes. So then that's $20 million. Okay, some bad investments or whatever like that. You bought a few properties or whatever. Let's just take you down to like $4 million. You don't have $35,000. Why are we talking about sweat equity and all this other googly gawk foolishness? Why are we sitting up here with multimillionaires talking about sweat equity for $35,000 investment? I mean, look, different people's stuff is set up differently. I shudder to think somebody made $40 million. Now, you wouldn't be the first one, but I shudder to think somebody made $40 million and can't invest $35,000 in something that they believe in and will invest their personal time into to grow. But you believe in ownership, but you don't believe in helping to foot the bill for ownership. Or you do, and you just don't have the $35,000, which is fine. Or you cheap, and you don't want to spend the $35,000, which is fine. But then don't turn around for somebody who did spend the money, and now they the devil, right? Because they're spending money to invest in something that they believe in, and you can't be bothered. Now you can show up and stuff, but why don't we? I want to know, why don't we have $35,000 to invest in this? When they first did the "What's Next for IAA," the December 13th episode from 2021, and they were talking about, they had brought up the fact. I can tell you. Let me see. I'll tell you about where it came up at, because I had to write some of this stuff down. I don't have time to be going back and forth with you guys. He said in that video, let me see. I guess it was around about 44 minutes and 15 seconds or something like that. Talking about the money talk, about how, Brandon, from Omar stating that Brandon made the initial investment. Everybody has doubled down, tripled down on that. Everybody has said Brandon Marshall made the initial financial investment. I still got people probably down there. No, that's not true. Whatever. You keep typing, please. Just help yourself down there. So my question is, who felt like they were getting mistreated and when? Because if it's true that it was brought to everybody, that all you had to do was invest $35,000 for a season, right? And that you would be in full part owner. Everybody shared the same way from the jump, right? And that's all you needed to do, in addition to, like, if you wanted to merch and other things like that. Why didn't we just pay the $35,000 at minimum for ownership, joint ownership of the investment of I Am Athlete? Why didn't we just pay the $35,000? Is it because we're just cheap? I mean, you could go back to from what I can tell, the first episode. I'm not sure if this is the very first episode, but like back in April of, what was that? April 17, 2020, the first little clip you'll find on I Am Athlete. You got Channing talking about something about, like, if you don't work, you don't eat type of stuff. He was talking about sports, but you should apply that to life. Where, basically put in on something that you want to benefit from, right? Put that down, like put that work in and put that down. And you end up taking, according to Brandon Marshall, you end up taking a per episode fee and not ownership. And then you got Fred on that first episode talking about he was so cheap he didn't even want to pay for watching a fight or something like that. They were talking about some fight. I don't know if it was UFC or something, but he was saying if he couldn't get it on his Fire Stick, he wasn't going to be able to watch it. So that cheap. Okay, now that's who you're dealing with for the moment, right? So it stands to reason that you might have had the money and just decided you weren't going to put anything into it. Now, he said Fred did say that he expressed his belief in ownership, and that was always the case. Fred has said that. Brandon has said that. Channing decided he was more concerned about the security. He said, I like the security. And he wanted the per show fee, whatever that number was, right? So that takes you out of the game off the top for me for discussion of ownership, which is probably why he never really brought it up. That's more so always, Fred talking about the ownership and how to break it down or whatever. And Channing talking about, like on Busted with the Boys, talking about wanted to worry about the talent on the show and not all this other stuff and whatever. Fine. Got you. But this, I don't understand the frustration or irritation of Channing for anything related to Channing. Now, if he's just upset with stuff he's heard about what's happening with Fred or something, I guess. But if you're taking per show fee as opposed to putting money on the table for ownership or something, then when something, that's why I'm confused when you get on Breakfast Club, they're talking about, when things are not done in the front end and not done right, when we're seeing checks coming in and now we're all of a sudden like, what's my part? What's my cut or whatever? Your cut is the same cut it was before on your per show fee. Now you can negotiate a better per show fee, but that was the cut. Like, what do you mean? Like, in terms of a conversation about ownership, right? So you can't say if that was a part of it, you can't say that Brandon doesn't value people because you got a per show fee. If that is the reason you're saying that, you devalued you when you decided not to invest in the business and become a full owner from the jump. Okay. But then at some point, Fred comes to Brandon and says, "Hey, okay, now I'm ready to have that conversation about making sure that the business is buttoned up," as Fred likes to say, in regard to ownership and all of that. So this is at about 25 minutes and 50 seconds on this episode. And then Marshall says, "Okay, cool. You want to talk about the business? No problem at all. Come into the office on Tuesday at noon. Let's get it taken care of. I'm gonna sit here, get everything worked out, right?" This is where Brandon says, we were where we were supposed to be for the meeting. Fred was a no call, no show. Just nothing, right? Now, you already don't want to put in initially the $35,000 to be owner, right? You talking about sweat equity and some other stuff that I mean, whatever. Like, everybody's doing the same where I don't know, you say sweat equity. And I still don't know what you were doing other than on air talent, which is, I mean, that's fine. That, for if that was supposed to equal the initial investment for the $35K and maybe up to like $50K, cool. I mean, that more than can make sense, right? At the time when that was the expenses that were being broken down. But you do know that as an owner and moving forward, there are going to be additional expenses that people are going to be breaking down. I mean, do you think that you're going to pay the initial investment and every other expense as a co-owner, every other expense that comes into the business, you're not going to be paying on that too? I mean, that's weird. I mean, for wanting somewhere between 26 and 33% of the business, right? Don't you want 26 or 33% of these bills? Now, what you can do with being like, when you get on paper and be like, you can weigh in to be like, I don't think we need to expend money on that or whatever, because you have a voice, right, in that regard. So you can definitely be active in that. But sweat equity up until what point? We not, like Brandon said at 25 minutes and 10 seconds, he said, the 100K or the 100 plus K investment end up turning into 600 or 700K of an investment. So while you no call and no showing and no paying, right? And y'all 4 or 5 months go by, y'all never, until y'all can get back around to having a conversation for some odd reason, because to me, you should be the person who the person who wants to have this conversation the quickest and to square things away and be present for the conversation. If you want to be an owner, present, active, helping to drive the business, helping to pay for the business, and also reaping the reward from the business, it would stand to reason that you might show up for the meeting to talk about you putting that on paper. That's just what I would think, right? But anyway, so Brandon says that they never rescheduled or whatever. This was, I guess, at 26 minutes and 20 seconds or so. Brandon says they never rescheduled or whatever until maybe 45 months later, right? And then this is when they had some explosive, emotional conversation together between, Fred and Brandon. I'm not sure if Channing was there as well, but Fred wanted. I'm gathering from what was said around 26 minutes and 40 seconds in is that Fred wanted, he said X percentage, but later on he said a quarter. So Fred wanted 25%, but didn't want to basically cough up the additional share of increased investment that was taking place all the while, right? Up to that roughly, 700K, right? So, and here was what the conversation was, and it's a real one, where it says at 27 minutes and 10 seconds, Brandon said, this is what he said to Fred: "Bruh, like, if this flopped, would you have come back and gave me $500,000 or $700,000? Meaning, you want now to be paid equal share of whatever's coming in now, but haven't paid, none of the investments leading up to that. Talking about sweat equity that don't cover increase. Sweat equity may have covered the initial investment that you were talking about at first, but that don't cover additional investment down the line up until what point? Are you going to be talking about sweat equity if you own you got 10 different outgrowth platforms, and now it's millions and millions of dollars a year to run multiple different productions? Are you still going to be talking about initial sweat equity? I mean, there are additional expenses that come up that you're going to have to pay for, and also be present enough to help make the decisions for, right? But they can't even get you to show up for a meeting about your interest in the company, and can't get you to call about it or be concerned about it, nothing. You just in the wind somewhere. I mean, that doesn't look great. That's terrible, honestly. So that's more of what sounds right to me. Again, Fred not actively being engaged in the business aspect of it, and Brandon. And this is the thing, y'all. This is the part where y'all get twisted. When I'm talking about when I have spoke about this before, this has been because you keep hearing one-sided vitriol against the other party of just how this person is so bad, so bad. Let's be clear. All of them messed this situation up. Be clear about it. You don't get this type of situation where everybody, where somebody is not wrong in this situation. Everybody's wrong. Fred, expecting everything to just fall in hand and come to you, and then you just get the windfall without taking any of the initial risk up front, when it's presumed, cautiously so, that you got the money to do so. I mean, that's none of my business, but somebody who done made $40 million over their career, I'm assuming you got $35,000 laying somewhere. Other than the initial $35,000, there's other money being spent. It's been, the company's growing fast. There's other things that have to happen for things to be in place, production and all of this other stuff that Brandon says is about $700,000, right? So the initial that $11 million that Brandon mentioned in the Sports Illustrated thing, I think $10 million of that was the House of Athlete, right? So he really shouldn't have mentioned that. Wow, that's one thing, Brandon. You should not have been mentioning the $10 million you spent on House of Athlete when talking about the IAA situation. And because the IA situation, it was maximum like $1 million, I think, by the time you got done. Because the valuations and things that were being brought up were between, like you said 600 or 700,000. And then some of the percentage that was thrown out made me think at some point the estimation was about $1 million, right? So that's, and then you said 11 million, right? So about $1 million of that would have been IAA, right? So you shouldn't have conflated those two, because really they weren't the same, right? The initial investment the initial idea brought to Fred and Channing was about a podcast, not having it be subordinate to House of Athlete, right? So that's just the truth of the matter. But once you get one person who want to take a per show fee and another person who can't be bothered to show up to just make sure that the ownership stake is set in stone and don't want to pay any of the money when you a multi-millionaire, don't want to pay $35K just to slap your name on it. He said, "I was this mine," unless you want to pay, or like you said, bust it down even. You didn't want to do that? Oh, okay. And how you gonna get a valuation of something that expenses have been racking up? Well, all the meantime, you haven't been having any of the conversation about the ownership, and can't be bothered to show up for the meetings about the ownership, and somebody else has to hunt you down to figure out Well, I thought we were supposed to have this meeting. Oh, something, whatever you came up with. Couldn't have been that important, right? And so now money's coming in, and I need the residuals and the this and the that. I need 35K initially, plus your share, whatever this 700,000 is that's been spent in the meantime, and your commitment to help break down by the percentage future expenses until this show is sold, or if it's not sold and we continue on or whatever. But man, take a look at the rest of my notes so I can get on through this so I can go to bed. Let me see here. What else we got? And you wouldn't have been trying to hunt him down to compensate him for any part of what he paid if the idea flopped. I don't see either one of y'all doing that. So, after the fact, when things are blowing up, you asking for too much. You doing too much. That's what you're doing. Then what I want to talk about. Okay, because I didn't like this part. I mean, you have to do what you have to do, I guess. But this let me know. So this is when I think the decision actually was made by Brandon, at least at the minimum of where he said, okay, I'm going to have to just go ahead and go about this on my own. Because we start seeing trademark filings pop up in June 21st, which makes sense. Around the time maybe he started thinking about trying to, bring other people on the platform to maybe replace a Channing and Fred. Probably about maybe roughly around June. So June 21st, you got a filing. You got some July 27th, and then a whole lot going on in December. December 6th, December 9th, with all these filings for trademarks for I Am Athlete stuff. At that point, I don't really think, in my mind, I'm thinking Brandon Marshall pretty much in June of 2021 was like, this is mine. You can do maybe a revenue share or something like that. So I'm assuming that between late June and the end of December, it probably really wasn't much communication at all, probably, because that's when you, like I said, you start seeing these filings, you start seeing these filings for trademark and all this kind of stuff for I Am Athlete being filed by House of Athlete, right? So it's kind of like now it's like, no, this belongs to House of Athlete. They're not being filed under a separate entity's name that maybe everybody might at some point own or be able to come into, right? It's owned under House of Athlete. So at that point, I'm not thinking that Brandon would be entertaining any split of ownership conversation. Perhaps because of the conversations that had happened beforehand. But the December 13th video was like, oh, we're going to figure something out. We got to figure something out because of our impact and that sort of thing. And I'm like, but that took off. At that point, I don't think ownership was on the table, for them to do what they needed to do, especially like I said, around that time in June or July, you were thinking about replacing them with other people in case something went down, right? So at that point, there's no trust in the situation at that point. But I think that's a little tricky because it's kind of like, did Fred and Channing know that there was these filings going on in June and July and in December about I Am Athlete just kind of wholly going under Brandon's name? I don't know. Like that part right there, I'm just like, I don't know about that one because I mean, that part right there feel a little. You got to protect your brand, but I feel like why not set that up under a separate entity name as opposed to set that up under House of Athlete? If the communication was still open at the time about ownership for Channing and Fred for I Am Athlete, why then have it under House of Athlete at that time? There may be some sort of explanation for that. I don't know, but I'm not necessarily seeing it. And that's like, to me, that sticks out kind of like, I think that could have been done better. Filing that stuff under that under a company name that Channing and Fred don't have anything to do with, kind of kills any further conversation, and that started back in June of 2021. And that's, you got 5-6 months of like dead space there, right? So where there could have been additional communication, right? So I don't know. And let me get to a little bit of the numbers, right? Because on the Breakfast Club, Fred was talking about that. He's like, Fred said on the Breakfast Club around 8 minutes and 30 seconds, he said on that Breakfast Club interview, he said, if my sweat is 50K and you put in 100K, to me, that looks like a third of the situation, about 26 to 27% after everybody chop, or I guess chop up the business evenly, right? And at some point he said it's not 5%. So when he said it's not 5%, deductive reasoning tells me that that may have been what he was offered potentially, like 5% based upon his valuation of 50K, right? Or of his sweat equity, right? So 5% of 50K would mean that it's a valuation of about $1 million. Now, if Brandon Marshall said it was between 600 and 700K, then to me that says that if it was 5% of 607 or 700K, let's say if it was 5% of 700K, then that means the valuation would be about 35K, right? Which was the initial amount that Brandon said that he was saying everybody bust it down to 35,000. Everybody, you put this in, right? So if he offered here, if it's true that that Brandon offered Fred 5%, that's the 35K. That would be the 35K if we're at the top end of what Brandon said, between 600 and 700K of expenses, and it was 700K. 5% of that is 35K. Yeah. So that's like, yeah, your sweat equity or whatever the third, let's just say that, based upon everything you did, it was your initial investment. Cool. Before we start spending all this other money and all the other kind of stuff, right? That would be 5% is your 35K. Right? But if I were to look at this and I were to say, okay, well, you want to be a joint owner, right? You want a third of this business, right? Okay, well, let me see. We done spent $700,000 to this point, invested in this business. Now this is separate from House of Athlete. Anything that was $10 million, like altogether, roughly around $11 million with the two together. $10 million separate for House of Athlete, right? We're just talking about I Am Athlete. That's about $700,000 at the time. Well, a third of $700,000 is $233,333.33 all off into eternity, right? So give me $233,000. You can subtract that little $35,000 out of that. Just give me the remainder to continue on, and you want a third ownership. Let's do that. If you ain't want to pay 35, I know you ain't want to pay 233,000. If it would be based on Fred's valuation of him 50K at 5% in the valuation of $1 million, that's 333,000. That's a whole extra 100,000. He ain't paying either one of them. He ain't paid the first one. So you don't want to pay the initial investment of a lower mid-level 5 figures. Now we done spent 6 figures on the upper end of 6 figures, and of course you don't want to pay that. You want the same valuation as when it started, but the expenses are not the same. And then you get mad when somebody say you don't understand business. And you do know additional expenses in the future, you're going to have to split that too, right? Okay, let me just listen. Okay, this is what I will say. When Brandon was asked about what he felt like he could have done better, he said he didn't really think he could have done anything better on the business side, that he would have made sure to take more of the emotion out of things if he could do anything differently. I think there's some things business-wise that could have been done differently, in addition to trying to remove some of the heated emotion out of things as well, right? Not having like blow-ups in meetings, maybe having a mediator, maybe having lawyers and that sort of thing. Try to keep it from being nasty amongst you all as colleagues, friends, at some point potentially and hopefully co-owners of something, right? So I think there could have been some things done differently. So that's the first thing with the filings of everything that I saw. Also, at the point of the initial meeting, right, where you set up this meeting with Fred to talk about ownership and Fred did not attend, there shouldn't have been 4 or 5 months in between that, especially when you, Brandon, know the amount of money you're spending and moving forward faster down the line. I know it's kind of difficult to stop what you're doing to in terms of trying to advance the business, to handle other things like the paperwork of things and that nature, but you got to do it. And at the point where you hadn't had the broken down conversation yet of ownership with Fred, because Channing was out of the picture, according to you, because he did not want to bet on the business. He wanted to just receive, he wanted to be an employee, based upon what you stated. Then I think it should have been more important to you to close that loop as well, especially knowing that you're spending more money day in and day out moving forward, which means a higher entry investment if you're knowing this all along from the potential co-owner who is going to come in with you, as well as discussion about future expenses, right? So if you were really interested in honoring that, I think you should have pushed harder to close the loop on that. And if that loop could not be closed, then fine, right? But I think you should have pushed harder on that. It can't just be somebody doesn't show up to a meeting and then we don't talk about it for 5 months. I think more could have been done on your part. Now, no call, no show, or whatever, that's, first of all, it's just disrespectful. Second of all, it is incumbent on that person to push for their interest in a business to be memorialized or reduced to a writing. And so that's Fred's part. But Fred, we covered all of Fred stuff going on. We're talking about Brandon. We're talking about you, right? So you should have closed the loop on that. Now, outside of that, trying to replace the folks ahead of time before concluding the business on stuff with Channing, perhaps. But even then, it's concerning because part of the reason why other people were pitching you to do different things and replace Channing with this person or that person, and you said, no way, it's no go, right? These are my guys. But you were already still very early on, I think. I don't want to say very early on, but in the middle of 2021, trying to find a replacement. So if you felt like Channing was that important to the show, perhaps there should have been more of a revisiting of Channing being able to do something related to co-ownership, even though Channing did not sign up for that. But if he were to foot the bill, then I would have reopened that, because Channing did mean a lot to the show, right? So even though Channing sold himself short in a way by taking the money up front, it made sense for the business overall to revisit that moving forward if Channing was going to continue to be part of the show and was an integral part of the show, because continuing to get a per show payment, right, a per show fee, that doesn't give the per show fee party any skin in the game for that particular business. It does give them a business case to go shop around and find a higher bidder, right? Which makes sense as to why you were talking about how he was going to this person, Alicia, trying to shop his show around, his fishing show around or what have you, because that would probably be something he would probably have some ownership in outside of the I Am Athlete umbrella. unless ownership was still on the table at that time. But it would make sense if that was something that Channing wanted to look into, to give him the opportunity to buy in. But of course, considering the higher investment that it would take to buy in, and then expenses that would be falling that would be coming upon the business moving forward. So so that's that. And then you allowing this is my thing right here. Don't let your non-owner revenue, I'm looking at my notes, y'all. Don't let your non-owner revenue sharing co-host misguide you. Right? So, and when I say that, I'm not saying that they didn't mean well. I'm not saying that there weren't some things that helped Brandon that they shared, you know, uplifting him. Like I said, that was actually a plus. I said if you could consider any part of that episode a plus, that they were trying to uplift him and find ways to, you know, help push him forward based upon, you know, just kind of speaking to the positive aspects that they've seen from his character, right? And decision making, right? But the reason I say don't let them misguide you is that a lot of this stuff that was going on with these other individuals like DJ and Pac-Man and Shady was that it was a lot of bad business ideas being thrown about, right? That kept coming up, right? So it's kind of like we don't want to combat bad business with more bad business, right? I mean, it's just anyway. Here's a couple of examples of what I'm talking about, right? So at 29:30, I can't remember who it was. One of them asked, what were Channing? Oh, it was Shady. Shady, he said, what were Channing and Fred doing before this? Like before I Am Athlete, right? So it's kind of like, were they popping beforehand, or like what was really going on, right? So, and he says that because he's like, you know, people need to be more grateful. He said this at 29 minutes and 45 seconds, that we got to be more grateful. So here's my thing. That's wholly irrelevant and kind of BS. And the reason why I say that is it doesn't matter what somebody was doing before they were entering into a business dealing at this point. When we're entering into a business deal and we come up with you know, a solid understanding of what we want to do together, and I express ownership and you understand that I want ownership, and we need to figure out the mechanics of how that works and how we'll flush that out and reduce it to a writing. It really doesn't quite matter as much, you know, when we're already talking about even splits, whatever was going on beforehand. Like once we decide we want to, you know, go forward with even splits and invest together and co-own something, all that other stuff is irrelevant. It's relevant up to the point of when you decide what you're willing to do or offer somebody or agree to get into an agreement. But after that, once that's been established and that baseline is there, it's irrelevant. And the reason I say the whole grateful argument about be more grateful, I wrote down, you are due what you are due. The problem is Channing and Fred weren't due what they were asking for. Right? So it's like if you express ownership or whatever, but you didn't pay in anything to it, and then you didn't set it in stone, or let's say you did pay a certain amount, or you were credited a certain amount for sweat equity or something like that. Let's say that's the case, but you don't want to you want to be co-owner, but you don't want to share in the expense of the business. What? No, that doesn't make any sense. So how can you be due revenue and co-ownership outright, legally and financially and all of that, and don't want the financial burden of what it costs to invest and run this thing? That's a no. If you're Channing and you take employee pay and employee stature in an organization, what are we talking about in terms of being mistreated when you say checks getting cut and money coming in? What exactly are you talking about? Your per show fee? Because in Pivot you have ownership and you're talking about how, yeah, my LLC and this person's LLC and this is all set up or whatever. But according to Brandon specifically, you said that you didn't want the risk, you wanted security, and you wanted the per show fee. So So ain't nobody did you wrong in that scenario. You just chose the safe route, not betting on yourself or the company that you were interested in having a relationship with, and you missed out. Period. I mean, like, and it's good that you have something else that you can now see the value in putting your own money up, but you did not at the time, according to Brandon. So, but anyway, that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant, right? In terms of what somebody is due in terms of the business dealings that they decide to do together. It's irrelevant, like how popping you were beforehand or whatever you were doing. Okay, that's the first thing to me, anyway. Then I think Pac-Man at 31 minutes and 8 seconds asked Brandon if Channing and Fred wanted to sit down for a podcast, would you sit down with them? Pac-Man, before Brandon could really get out a coherent answer, he's like, if I'm being honest, Pac-Man said, no, because I ain't going to let you. Right? So it's like adding, like, extra gas on something for parties who weren't really there. I'm sure they are privy to so much that we will not know. But just again, as a viewer, as a consumer of the content, it just seems off for such large, for such strong stances for folks who weren't involved, right? And it seems like it's just adding gasoline to something that does not need to be there, right? That's unnecessary, right? An unnecessary addition from an uninvolved initial party, right? And now I hope I'm not misrepresenting. I'm trying to remember. I believe it was Pac-Man. I believe it was Pac-Man Jones that said, ain't no such thing as being fair. F what you talking about. Because at the end of the day, business is business. But wait a minute. What does that mean? And then he mentioned, like, well, to Brandon, how many owners have you played for? How many of them treated you right? Well, there you go. Like, no. The answer, first of all, business is business. That statement is true without regard for what type of business that you do. When it comes to, I mean, you can do business, you can do good business, you can do bad business, but it's all business. So saying business is business in itself does not inherently mean be unfair to everybody, and that's the type of business that we do, right? In terms of the concept of fair. I'm not sure if that's exactly what he was trying to say, but that's what I got from it. He's saying, forget being fair. Business is business, right? And I don't think that's how you want to go into it with, when we talk about in the spirit of brotherhood, black men working together, in the spirit of building something, in the spirit of having your end customer in mind, the public in mind that you are giving this content to, what you want them to learn from it, what you want them to get from it, what you want the value of your product, your end product to be. It's not, let me just do whatever kind of thing I want to do, bad business, right? I mean, I can only hope that that's not what he meant, but that's what came across in the editing from what I could see, right? And it didn't seem thought out, it didn't seem necessary, and it seemed to be counterproductive message-wise. If any of this was trying to help build or help give a counterbalance to what others are doing to Brandon's character, that did not help, in my opinion. Right? So I didn't like that, right? Brandon, you allowing all of this, right? Like, edit this thing. Cut this mess out. Talk to your producer. Talk to Omar. Omar, this trash. Take this out. Like, not the people. I mean, the take on certain, take this out. This is not the message we want our end user to be downloading. That's not the takeaway, right? Oh yeah, again, like at the 33 minutes and 5 second mark, likening the I Am Athlete podcast and Pivot podcast back and forth to a zero-sum kind of like football game, winner takes all football game, right? Where it's like, if you win, I lose everything. If I win, you lose everything. Like there's no happy medium in between the two of you just going your separate ways and handling your business and leaving each other the hell alone. Like that, I mean, and some of that could be just the sports mentality of literally how a lot of athletes, especially like in football or something, powered through adversity, right? This is where I kind of want to remember the vantage point that I'm getting in terms of what I'm viewing, right? Getting the vantage point from people who have powered through adversity in sports with certain mentality, right? And that permeates even outside of sports into other aspects of the world. But sometimes you got to realize when that is not necessarily the most productive, the most fruitful thing or thought process, right? Because what y'all doing doesn't necessarily need to have anything to do with what the pivot is doing. Now, if you all fit the same exact niche in the same market, of course you will have your benchmarks, metrics, market share analysis, SWOT analysis, your strengths, weakness, and opportunities and whatever else. Third, you'll have your full analysis, right? Threats, SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, whatever. And you will have your full analysis there, but this seems different. What's coming across seems to be like, no, I'm not looking at the market which we might share in. I'm looking at you, and I'm gonna take you down. And why? For the purpose of what? You all have learned some very valuable stuff from this. And I think you all would benefit from just leaving each other the heck alone. Like, do y'all need to go bad mouthing each other to every athlete in the industry? Do y'all need to go and, pit yourselves against each other? Do y'all need to spend 20% of your interview talking about, externally about the other party? And I'm just talking about both. I'm not talking about any one party now, because now everybody just messy. It ain't no Pivot is bad, or Channing and Fred is bad, or Brandon is bad. Everybody in here messy. Right? Everybody messy, and y'all just chatting it up. And we just, we're observing, right? But since we can't get y'all to shut up, none of y'all, then let's talk about it. And that's what's going on. So, yeah, so my other comment about that was that growth in the market here does not hinge on the complete failure of the other. So one can do well, the other can do well. One can do poor, the other one can do poor. You both could be out of here and the market still be wide open for all the smoke and whoever else in the third podcast coming up. I don't know, Draymond Green and whoever else is doing something, right? Like, there's much more out here than a laser focus on each other. You guys really, and then I want to understand how that again it benefits the end customer, the end consumer, your end product, and who it's going to. Is this more about now? See, let me just say it this way, Brandon, don't let this foolishness take your eye off of the quality and direction of the end product. At some point, we don't care about who did what anymore. You guys are not on, like, everybody is fine. Nobody is deathly ill. Nobody is destitute. Nobody, look, it didn't go well. Separate. But at a certain point, separate or heal together or separately, whatever. But like, it's like, what needs to happen? It really feels like it just needs to be just laying of it all out and laying it down. Like, just let it go, And so I don't know, man. It's too much. And so let me see. And to the point of the whole, winner take all mentality or whatever. At one point, DJ says that Brandon told him when DJ told Brandon that I needed to hear that, and maybe that means something else to somebody in sports. To me, I don't know why we needed to hear that, because them being successful or not ain't got nothing to do with you being successful or not. Uh, you're your own being. You were powering this whole thing forward beforehand. So you keep moving, you keep going, and you learn and you become better. But what that got to do with them? Because ain't nothing they doing stopping you from doing nothing you're doing, as far as I know, right? So I didn't understand that, and then they brought this up in terms of like, and the reason why I said don't let them don't let different people throw you off base. Be very careful to the information that you take in times where you're in low points, because taking that information in, you saying, oh, that's what I needed to hear or whatever. What DJ describes happening immediately after that was Brandon going into, how messy should I get? What, should I congratulate them or should I get messy? This and that. So you go into immediate whirlwind of having to decide whether or not to do good business or bad business, be shady, not shady, to be mature or immature, like immediately though. And so that's, that I'm sure that there was more that went into it than just like that comment or whatever, but just based upon the way the interview progressed, it was kind of like, we say, hey, it's us against them, and we got to do this, we got to do that, and whatever, and that sent you into like, well, what should we do? Get messy? Why? Leave it unnecessary to drive forward. So I would encourage you, Brandon, to think differently. It seems like your better mind took over, in a sense of like, maybe I should congratulate them or something, or just, move on or whatever, and not think of it in terms of winner take all type of thing, and you have to take somebody down. I'm glad your better mind got a hold of you, but I would really have preferred none of that probably be shared, because true enough, people go through emotions when things happen. You're a person, you're human or whatever, but sharing that piece, it wasn't really a good look to me. And from what it seems like you made the right decision in terms of just staying out of the fray of the nonsense for the most part, at least in public, right? So that extra information, that wasn't a good look, and I'm not sure what we're supposed to get from that. It was kind of nasty. Anyway, then you got at 44 minutes and 30 seconds, you got, Shady and Pac-Man and everything going back and forth about, like, yeah, those other guys, they were good, but, we here now, and now we this and that. I mean, we don't need you guys to be necessarily pit up directly against Channing and Fred from Pivot. It's unnecessary. You guys were not involved, as far as I know, in that initial situation. And it's unnecessary to like put like 1 versus 1, like player versus player, against the former team members for I Am Athlete. Like, I mean, I get the sports thing in y'all in sports, but like on the business front, it's just unnecessarily messy. And it's just like, I guess maybe y'all just owning it now at this point, but I don't see the need to make even to your viewer base. Because it seems like then that would make like the viewers who probably are not as sharp with it. Now are we against Pivot? Are we against I Am Athlete? Are we, when they could be getting something positive from both platforms? Not that it's your duty to try to drive traffic to the Pivot, but it's also not necessarily your duty to take traffic away from there. Like, yo, this is, add value, and your base will be your base, and to the extent that you provide value and your product is good, it's really no worry there. Podcasting is actually still developing. Like the market is not even saturated. Like, well, there's a lot of podcasts, but the market is not even really developed in terms of everybody who, like, the listening ears and the hours listening and all that kind of stuff. That stuff is still developing. Like, yo, just be great and let them be great, and chill. Yeah, and more of the same at 46 minutes. It's kind of just like, yeah, it's us versus them. That was terrible. That was terrible. Y'all should have cut that and never let that air. I don't know what. Omar, what's going on over there? Like, what did you tell them you were going? You should have cut all of that. I mean, you could have darn near scrapped that whole thing. Honestly, and be like, yo, let's sit on this and do this another day because this. Mm-mm. That's my response. Mm-mm. Nah. But anyway, so if I had to sum this up, man, like, yo, like I said, there's a lot of stuff, Brandon. This is more so to you because I feel like we learned a lot of what I suspected from Channing and Fred. We learned a little bit more details about that, and it just kind of bringing it full circle and making it make sense. But that ruling stands. I'm just talking about more so with you, Brandon, like from the top to the bottom on this situation. Well, first of all, for the podcast episode, all over the place, you should have scrapped that, started over, and really curated and cultivated the messaging that's supposed to come out of that and the way that things are presented. If you weren't gonna be the Oprah of the episode, make sure that you give it to somebody who could hold it down. Omar could have held that down. I'm not saying nobody else could have either, but maybe it wasn't even made a point to the fact that needed to be the case and have it framed in such a way, but it didn't feel framed. It didn't feel structured. And I think Omar could have did something with that if nobody else is going to do it, right? And then framing, I think making sure you structured the information that you wanted to come out and presented it in a better, more coherent way in terms of having the details together and really, really putting us in the mind state and frame of the meeting setting, who was in the room, what was said, what were the specific details. I mean, like we got some of that, but it could have been set up much more vividly to leave, I think, a more definite impression in terms of what opportunities you allow for the open communication that you mentioned. So that's about the episode. Oh, and then lastly, you should have pulled rank on some of the editing and production of this. I mean, Omar too. Like this, I was all over the place, and I don't even know how this got released. It looked a mess. And I don't think it did Joe's story too much justice, and I don't think it did I Am Athlete versus Pivot. I say versus loosely. I mean I Am Athlete and Pivot situation it much justice, right? And then you got a bunch of people involved. I mean, full throttle, strong opinion for folks who were not to the public sphere involved. Like some people like involved in the back, you kind of know both people or whatever, fine. But like, I think I feel like it was too much from people who weren't in privity to the original issue. Privity of contract and all that, whatever. I mean, even I feel like it was too much from people who weren't invested in the initial I Am Athlete endeavor, because it was just too much. Now to the specifics of things that could have been done better, even outside of the episode itself. I think it could have been done better to make sure, like I've said this before, that the business was taken care of on the front end, that expectations were known on the front end and followed up on. If everybody said, hey, we're splitting this down the middle with, $35,000 a piece or whatever, and this is what we got to do, and this is when we need it by so we can produce and do this and that, then fine. If somebody said, okay, I'm doing sweat equity up until a certain point, then okay, and then I'll invest thereafter or whatever, but the details needed to be worked out. I don't think it's enough to just say we set up a meeting and then the person didn't show up and then for 5 months we didn't talk about it again. That's not prudent on your part, because then you get situations like this, right? Even though that person should be responsible enough to figure out how to advocate for themselves in a business dealing and make sure that they are secure. Without regard for that, it was on you to make sure that you concluded that, right? As a person who's leading this ship, you should have made sure that that was clear and what the expectation would be for investment moving forward. You know, up until the show got sold, or if you change, or somehow, you know, the show was no longer going to be sold and going to be remain owned by the owners. That needed to also that also needed to be agreed upon amongst everyone if it was going to be co-ownership, right? Now, again, you can't really talk about co-ownership if people are not doing co-ownership things, right? You know, so, but this is more so about branding, right? So there's a lot of things business-wise you could have done other than just the emotional aspect. For instance, also, you know, around the time where you're looking for replacements for folks because you can kind of see things coming. I'm thinking that was maybe around June, July, when you start, you know, looking for other people, you know, to maybe come on to replace folks or whatever. It could have been a little more clear even at that point, you know, in terms of, hey guys, investment, like we gotta get the initial investment right if we're talking about ownership, right? And these are the figures, open the books or whatever, like this is what's going on, right? I'm not saying you didn't open the books or whatever, but that needed to be something that did not linger to the point where you're having your foot halfway in with your current folks and halfway out where you're trying to, you know, bring other people on to replace them, not to add and supplement, but to replace them. I think that could have been done better. I think also, you know, again, with like starting to see the filings pop up, if you were gonna make sure you secured the intellectual property for I Am Athlete, I think it should have been done under a new entity holding company name other than House of Athlete, because until and unless everything was settled that Fred did not want to do co-ownership, or Channing didn't maybe think about doing co-ownership and wanting to buy in because he was such a big presence on the show. Yeah, I think it should have been a holding company hold the trademarks for I Am Athlete, as opposed to that being held or filed for under House of Athlete, which there was no ownership or anything to do with House of Athlete from Channing or Fred. And I think it should have been done separately until the business was concluded in terms of whether or not Fred was going to buy in, whether or not Channing was thinking about buying in. And I only say that not because he had a right to, because the business was already taken care of, but because he was such a large component to the show in terms of personality and what he brought to the show, that it would make sense to give him, again, the opportunity to buy in just at a higher buy-in because of the investments that have been going forward. So I think all of that could have been done better. And, you know, especially when you get to the topic of communication, all of that is communication. You know, you can't, you know, you tell somebody, you can't stand me up, man, when we're trying to square this business away. What are we doing? Why is this taking so long? Let's get this part done so that we can focus on, you know, hey, like, when are you chipping in financially for some of this extra stuff I'm paying for? You know, like that needed to be done. And I'm trying to think what else, man. That's a lot to take on and to try to learn from as you move forward, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things that specifically Brandon, that you could have done other than just keep the emotion out of things. I think keeping the emotion out of things is an important note. But I think the communication aspect, you would be doing yourself a great disservice to believe that communication-wise, you could not have done better. So I think you need to listen a little bit more to what DJ's perspective on that, not necessarily on camera, because I don't know, but him having the ear of Fred and having your ear and him listening to both of you all. Like he said, it sounds like there was some miscommunication. I believe that. I believe that there was some miscommunications, right? But I ultimately think that perhaps it may have ended the same way. We don't know that, but because just the unwillingness of folks to to share in the risk of the business. I think there was no reluctance from Channing or Fred once they saw the proof of concept and they saw that it could be profitable and there was a lot of money to be made. Because then all of a sudden we have no problems. I got my LLC. We got the parent company. We split this way. We paying all our money into the thing. Now all of a sudden everybody got money to pay into something, right? So, but couldn't find you for the $35K initially when we didn't really know what was going on, right? So, whatever. But there's a lot to be done, Brandon, and I think communication is a huge component to that. And the thing is, communication is not something that you can ever get 100% right. And, it's not a test that you study for and get a 100. Like, it's always a way to be a little bit better, a little bit, when you got different personalities, different people involved, there's always ways to improve on that. So don't even think just because perhaps, you're, have become a better communicator or you have voiced things in the best way you know how, doesn't mean that there's not something that could be learned moving forward. So don't do yourself that disservice. If I could say anything about coming away from this, do not do yourself the disservice of believing that there was nothing business-wise in terms of communication and other things that you could have done differently. But anyway, I'm done. I keep saying that, but you know what? I mean, as long as you guys want to talk about it, I mean, whatever. Let's talk about it. I'm tired of it myself, but okay. There's a lot to come from this, a lot to learn. And it seems like, to be honest with you, there's more and more things that keep coming out that are teachable moments, honestly. And I really think, to be honest with you, on Brandon's side, on Channing's side, on Fred's side, I think all of you all, to a certain extent, are doing yourselves a disservice to thinking that, to sticking to your corner and not seeing the things that you have done that played into the demise of you all's relationship, business and professional. I mean, business and personal. There are things that all of you have done that added to the destruction of what was formerly you three together on I Am Athlete. And if any single one of you came away from that situation thinking that you were in the right and clear, dead wrong. Dead wrong. So, I don't know, man. We'll see what else comes of it. I think the people are just kind of loosening up, seems like. I mean, every time I think it's kind of done, it'll just get some new foolishness. So, we'll see. But again, we'll be here to learn more about the positive things that can come out of what initially kind of was negative. So in any event, this is another episode of OPM and Beyond, where we discuss, you guessed it, other people's money to learn more about ourselves and how to create generational wealth. I am your host, E. Rains, and I got to go to bed. Bye.
I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game. All of those dark nights I got then, breaking my back to make it out, got me feeling like rain. I ain't never need your help, I know you wishing me well. A penny for your thoughts, but seeing no change. I snap for the sun like Diddy. The riches got a mad ass son, I'm like Billy. I ain't never switch up, whole team with me. Putting on for my city like OAGZ.